Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're diving into how two absolute literary giants, John Milton and Aphra Behn, dealt with a century of pure chaos in England. And their weapon of choice? Well, it was the power of the written word.
No, I mean, seriously think about that for a second. Imagine everything you believe in, your politics, your faith, your whole idea of what your country is suddenly not just wrong, but treasonous. The world you grew up in is just gone. This wasn't some thought experiment for people living in 17th century England. This was their life after years of a brutal civil war. And out of all that wreckage, two incredible writers came along and offered completely different playbooks for surviving a broken world.
Okay, so first things first, let's set the scene. Because to really get Milton and Behn, you have to understand the absolutely chaotic world that they were writing in.
I mean, look at this timeline. This wasn't just a simple change in government. This was the ground shifting under everyone's feet. First, they execute their own king. Then they set up a republic. And then, not much more than a decade later, they bring the monarchy right back. The political whiplash was just intense. It left everyone wondering, okay, who are we now?
And this experience, this feeling of displacement, of being cast out from everything you thought you knew, whether in your beliefs or literally from your home, that became the core trauma of the age. It was this huge collective crisis that artists and writers just had to grapple with.
And that is exactly what Milton and Behn did. They came at it from totally different angles, but they were both, in a way, working on the same project, using stories to try and piece together a coherent identity from all the broken fragments of their world. So let's start with John Milton. This was a man whose entire political world had just completely crumbled around him. And we're going to see how he channeled that personal disaster into one of the greatest spiritual epics ever written. So you have to understand, Milton wasn't some bystander. He was a major voice for the English Republic. He was on the winning team right up until he wasn't. When the monarchy came back, his whole cause was basically wiped off the map. He became an outcast in his own country, and that personal catastrophe really forced him to look inward to find some kind of answer. So what does he do? He goes epic. He takes his very specific, very personal political failure and blows it up to a universal spiritual scale. The story of Adam and Eve getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden, that becomes this grand metaphor for losing his own political paradise. He's asking, what's left when everything you've built is just gone? And this line right here, spoken by Satan, by the way, this is it. This is the absolute core of Milton's solution. If the world outside is a hell you can't change, then the only real freedom, the only paradise you have left, is the one you build inside your own mind.
Okay, but while Milton, the political insider, retreated into the mind, Aphra Behn took a hard look at the brutal physical world around her, and she showed us a very, very different kind of exile.
Aphra Behn, who was one of the first professional female writers in England, just completely flips the script. Her perspective, coming from the margins of society, was totally different. She shifts the focus away from Milton's ideological loss and shines a light on the real, tangible, violent suffering that was being inflicted on people's bodies, especially as England's empire started to grow.
In her work, Behn shows us, step by step, how you can literally dismantle a person's identity. Oroonoko starts out as a prince, a man defined by his honor. Then, he's betrayed and captured, and in the final, brutal step, his very name, the heart of who he is ripped away. He's no longer Oroonoko, he's just Caesar, a slave. And this is where she and Milton just completely part ways. For Behn's hero, there is no paradise within. It doesn't matter how virtuous or strong-willed you are on the inside, it can't save you from the absolute trauma of being physically enslaved. For Behn, the outside world has the power to completely crush the self. So we've got these two totally different ways of looking at the world. How does the idea of memory fit into all of this? How did each of them use it to process this feeling of displacement? Okay, so this lays it out perfectly. For Milton, the whole battle takes place in the mind. His exile is internal, it's about ideas, and the end goal is a kind of spiritual victory. But for Behn, the fight is on the body. Her story is about physical exile, and it's not looking for redemption. It's a blistering indictment of a society that allows this to happen.
So they're both using memory, but for completely different reasons. For Milton, remembering Paradise Lost is painful, sure, but it's also a lesson. It's meant to teach you something, to make you more resilient. For Behn, the memory of what happened to Oroonoko is pure trauma. It's not a tool for self-help, it's a weapon for historical justice. It demands that we look at this horror and never, ever forget it.
And when you read this line, which describes Oroonoko's brutal death after being tortured and dismembered, and you put it up against Milton's idea of finding heaven in your own mind, wow, it just lands with this devastating final thud. There is no spiritual win here. There's just the cold, hard reality of a life that was destroyed.
So, why are we still talking about these two books hundreds of years later? What makes their stories still resonate so powerfully today? Let's get into it. I think what they both show us from their very different corners is that when the world gets turned upside down, your identity isn't just something you have. It's something you have to actively build. You have to forge it in the fire of what you've lost. And their real legacy is proving that literature can be the very place where those lost worlds and the people who lived in them are remembered.
So at the end of the day, what Milton and Bennett both teach us is that surviving a crisis, whether it's personal or national, really comes down to the stories you can tell about it. Milton tells a story of internal victory from the perspective of the loser, and Behn, the outsider, tells a story of external injustice that she insists must be told and must be remembered.
They used stories to navigate their broken world and to figure out who they were. And that makes you think, right? In our own times of instability and constant change, what are the stories we're telling ourselves just to make sense of it all? It's the same question they were asking centuries ago, and it's every bit as urgent for us today.